the cost of poor employee performance is huge. I remember a study by the conference board found that the average cost of disengaged employee is close to 3,400 per year. And that cost, it was already 4 years ago. You can imagine that it has already increased drastically. This cost includes the loss of productivity and absenteeism. My guest today is Steven Gaffney. And if you haven't heard, but I would be astonished if you haven't heard about Steven, he has written so many groundbreaking books, such as Just Be Honest, Authentic Communication Strategies That Get Results and Last a Lifetime, Honesty Works, and Be a Change Champion. So I'm going to be talking mainly about his latest book, Unconditional Power, Thriving in Any Situation, no matter how frustrating, complex, or unpredictable. This book talks about how to cultivate a culture of achievement and what are these behaviors, these actions that you need to be practicing or kind of habits in order to achieve high performance. By the way, Steven Gaffney is a leading expert in change management, honest communication, and high-performing teams. Steven, you cannot believe how glad I am that you made it to my podcast. Finally, thank you very much, Steven.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Listen, I want to dig into a sentence that struck me in your book. So you are mentioning in your book that a study shows that when you are positive, you are 31% more productive, 40% more likely to receive a promotion. So you are using some research that was done on the topic. And let me be honest, I'm not a believer of magic, so I don't read or listen to podcasts or from gurus about self-performance. So what exactly happens in your brain specifically when you are in this positive mood, or maybe in my language, I call it mindset? What happens?
So first of all, let's talk about positive versus negative. I actually think that terminology is not the best because it's easy for negative people to argue about positive people. Let me explain what I mean by that. If we say somebody's positive, a negative person could say, well, that person is not realistic. They're not taking into account all the consequences or risks. So what a better framework is optimism and pessimistic, because optimistic and pessimistic people both are realist. It's just how we view the future. So an optimistic person, or often what's referred as positive, but really an optimistic person is much better to frame it up, is viewing that, look, this might be a tough situation, but in the end, we're going to figure out how to solve this, and great things are going to happen. A pessimistic person looks at the same situation and says, we're doomed. And that's the issue. So why is it so important to be optimistic versus pessimistic? And why would you be more productive? And the simple answer is, if you're optimistic and you view that there's something good that's going to come about, we're more likely to take action. We're more likely to be persistent. If we're pessimistic, why take action? We're doomed. So you see this a lot, because what happens is, and we can talk about this, that I wrote about in the book, that people suffer from conditionalism, meaning they'll say, I can do that as long as they do a better job, as long as I have more money, as long as I have more teamwork. There's always some excuse. But unconditionally powerful is about making things happen. So in essence, optimistic people, it's often referred as positive, but I like optimism better, are more successful because they think there's going to be an answer. So they're going to be really persistent and confident to approach the problem.
So you use words like conditioning. So it makes me think about the fact that society norms, in fact, are repeating constantly messages to our brain that map the way we perceive the world. So this is not going to work. This has been tried before. As a Latino, I'm not made to occupy a CEO, a CEO position. As a woman, I cannot be a good engineer. So it's the repetition of our surrounding that is going to condition our way of perceiving the world. That's, I guess, one of the root causes. And maybe I'm also thinking about the fact that as humans, we are emotional. So emotions are going to distort our reality, right?
Well, emotions do, but what I think the component that we have to add in there is that we're in charge of our surroundings. It is true that up until the age of 18, right, we're somewhat of the, when I say, I don't mean victim, but we are, our parents are in control of us, right, and certain things, right, at least in the U.S. And, but what ultimately, we have a lot of control over our situation. We have control of our friends and our ultimate surroundings. And as adults, we need to really be looking at, we shape our environment. So here's what I mean by that. If you're in a job that you don't like, what's it going to take so you like the job? What's it going to take for you to be great at the job, or change the job, or do something? And somebody might say, but, I need to make a living. Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't make a living, but the bottom line is, then do what it takes. Life is short. You got to move on things. If you're in a group of friends and let's say a lot of them are negative and bringing you down or pessimistic, change the friends. And people might say, well, I don't know where those optimistic people are. Well, here's the first step. Go search. Go, do something. I remember when I first started my business, there's only one friend out of pretty much everybody in my life who thought I could pull this off. And so it was a very scary time because at the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing and I was kind of fumbling my way through it. And I had a very good friend of mine who was very, concerned, and he's a good buddy of mine. He said, look, I'm really concerned. You're, putting yourself in a very financial tough situation and it's not going to work, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said to him, finally, I said, look, there's two choices in our friendship. Either we I take a sabbatical from our friendship. In other words, we pause because I can't stand to hear this anymore. Or you on purpose stop saying what you're saying and I don't want to hear it. And the reason is I'm all for honesty, and I got it. You're concerned and I'm concerned. But dwelling on the same point over and over again. So here's the choice: either a sabbatical or stop talking about this part. And we can talk about all kinds of things. I'll credit my friend. He did stop. He said, no. We're good buddies. We'll stay friends, and I'll stop bringing this up. I'm worried, but I'll leave it out. And we're great friends to this day. But here's my point in saying this. Instead of blaming my friend, I'm like, what do I need and how do I shape my surroundings? So I think there's a big part of life where people will blame their surroundings. If you don't like your surroundings, change your surroundings.
There is a trick with the brain that makes it that, in fact, I have the impression that the brain sucks at forecasting the future. So you mentioned it somehow that when you were using the sentence, as long as I can get this. In fact, we are always expecting that we are going to be more happy when we get a promotion, when we get our first $200,000 per year, or when we get married and whatsoever. So we are delaying actions that depend on us, that could be designed in purpose by us in order to make the path towards higher happiness or higher income or higher performance or whatever. So our brain is the one that is making our life like hell, right?
And we're in charge of our brain. So first of all, the reason why I wrote this book, Unconditional Power, is because I've suffered from moods, and I've been down before, and it's part of an evolution in life. I mean, a part of our life, we get up, we get down, whatever. But I sometimes something would happen, and I would, not clinically depressed, but I would be down. But then I noticed some people would be down momentarily, but bounce right up. So I started to look at what do they do that I don't do, and I became in search of this, and that's what caused me to write the book, because there's things that we can do. And so what's an example? An example is the way to reframe a situation. So actually, a mentor said this to me, and this changed my life. Happiness is an inside job. Happiness is an inside job. In other words, it's very easy to say, I'll be happy when this happens, when that happens, whatever. But when you really look at life, there's some people that have a lot less than us and are more happy. Why? Because they generate their happiness. I can be, appreciative of what I have or be focused on what I don't have. Right. And so happiness is an inside job. So when I heard that, it made me realize that it is not about my circumstances. It's about how I impact and shape my circumstances. And if I don't like something, what am I going to do about it? But I've got to generate my own happiness. I have to stop blaming other people. Here's something else to consider. People blame their parents and their surrounding, how they grew up a lot. I often hear, and, I would do good, but, the way I was raised, or I had this problem or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I'm definitely a believer that some people have a gift of being in great circumstances from the get-go, right? Well, great parents or great education or money or whatever the case may be. But here's the point, is that at a certain point, we as adults, we have to take responsibility because this is what occurred to me. Time deepens wounds and deepens problems. I grew up when time heals all wounds. But if time really did heal all wounds, nobody would be blaming their parents or their background. Now, I'm fortunate. I had great parents. But the point that I'm trying to make is we have to stop saying about time is going to heal things. You got to take care of things now. So if you're in a bad marriage, you're in a bad working situation, time isn't going to make it better. I'm not saying you got to leave it, but you got to do something now. Life is precious. Tomorrow is not guaranteed, as they say. So time doesn't heal all wounds. It deepens the wounds. It deepens the problem. So take action now.
I'm totally with you. And I just want to verify my understanding. So what you're saying is that it's not, there are certainly cases, extreme cases, where we can be badly hurt by the upbringing of our parents or something happened in our youth. But what you're saying is that if you don't do anything to correct that now, it's not going to go over. You're going to carry that weight, despite that it was awful, whatever happened with the parents, that you're going to carry that weight until the end. And it's not going to get better unless you do an action when you know that you have spotted that you have some wounds that needs to be healed right now. That's my understanding.
Absolutely. And in the book, I talk about reframing, which many people have thought, how you frame, how you look at a problem. And here's a reframe that somebody said to me and really changed my life. All problems, with every problem, there's an opportunity. There's always an opportunity in a problem. I'm not saying all problems are good. I'm saying there's always an opportunity in a problem. So let me give you an example. I am a cancer survivor. So I went through cancer and I'm completely fine now. Am I thankful that I went through cancer? Absolutely not. Is it a horrible experience? Absolutely. Do people have it way worse than I ever had? Absolutely too. But so I'm not thankful that I went through the cancer experience. However, it was an opportunity. And so it was an opportunity where I pushed a lot of things down in life. Because I always thought I and others would live like long, long time. And I realized you just got to seize the moment now. So I definitely don't plan much for the long distance future. I'm like, what am I going to do now? So when somebody says, I'm going to take a great vacation, I'm going to plan it accordingly, and I'm going to take it in a year. I'm like, a year? It's not guaranteed. What's it going to take for you to do something now, or at least in the near future, right? And so I'm saying this because with cancer, I'm not glad it happened. But given that was a problem, there was an opportunity in there. So when we have bad things happen, which clearly we do, and I don't believe in, the sugarcoating things. Some things are really bad. The question is, what are we going to take from that? What's the opportunity? And you see that people go through things in life and they still blame things in the past and they don't move forward. They're not forgiving. They're not moving forward. It's like a client of mine said, at a certain point in my life, I felt like, I'm trying to run a marathon and people hold me down at the ankles. And they hold me down at the ankles. But the bottom line is I'm letting them hold me down at the ankles. I'm creating that situation. So how do I free myself and move forward? So learn from the past, look for the opportunity, do what it takes to move forward so you have a great life.
I totally feel you, Steven. Getting back to the book. So, you look at the title, Unconditional Power, and then you think, power, what the hell? So does it mean that it's about influencing, manipulation, how to be a great politician? So, and I wanted to clarify, because when you dig in the book, that is not that. It's not what I imagined. So in your own words, what is the meaning of power? And let's jump already to the next question. How is it connected to our own mood?
Great question. So thank you. And so, because I want to give an opportunity to make this really clear. This isn't power over somebody. It's about internal power. Think of it like our confidence, our engine, our fuel. What's it going to be? So it's generating our power that we all have or we all can be and are powerful if we recognize that. So it's our internal power, but it's not over someone. It's just being powerful, being confident. And so what I've come to realize is there are three types of overarching moods. And I use the word power because I think of it as that way. And so let me explain what I mean by that. One mood is a powerless mood, and that's where we feel powerless over the situation. We feel like we have no control. We feel like, what am I going to do about it? We often might say, I'm only one person here. What can I do? It's how a lot of people suffered during COVID and other aspects of our life. And we all get knocked down. And in that moment, we do feel sometimes powerless. We all feel that way at times in our life. The second type of mood is a conditional powerful mood, where I call it conditionalism. And that's what I addressed earlier, where we say, I can do that as long as I have more money, as long as I have more resources, as long as circumstances are different, or whatever the case may be. And so the problem is that we recognize we have some power, right? Some control, but it's often conditional on other things happening. But the desirable mood, the overarching third mood, is unconditionally powerful. And that is where we recognize there are legitimate conditions, but we spend 100% of our control over what we're going to do about it. So this unconditional power is why I call it the book Unconditional Power, because that's the desirable mood we want to get in. So we're all experience all three moods. The question is, how do we do our best to stay in unconditionally powerful? And this is really critical. How do we get other people to feel unconditionally powerful? Because if we feel unconditionally powerful, but other people are feeling conditional or powerless, they're going to weigh us down. It's easy to allow that situation. So we want to empower them to be unconditionally powerful. So the book is not only strategies you can use, we can use on ourselves, but also how to use it on other people. So everybody is unconditionally powerful, because when we all feel that way, because remember, it's not power over somebody. It's we're feeling confident. We're taking charge of our life. We're not blaming. We're moving things forward. We all benefit.
Steven, so you have defined the three different moods, and I have the impression, for a person who hasn't read your book, so these moods come and go. It can be like at one moment I feel awesome, the other one I'm going to be in this conditional mood. Sometimes I'm going to be powerless. And so your book is about how to increase the share of this unconditional power. So how to maintain it, how to make it a little bit like every day takes a bigger share of our day. Because I don't think that is, you cannot get rid of these moments of powerless.
No, everything
happens. Maintain a big share of the unconditional power, right?
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, I'm out of Washington, D.C., and there's a American football team called the Commanders, and they keep losing, and I'm a big fan. It makes me feel down. I'm like, I feel powerless. Anyway, and sometimes we look at American politics, or I look at American politics, and I'm saying, what difference can I make? So anyway, the point is, you can watch news, you can have events, and we can all kind of feel that way, whether it's kind of half joking or sometimes serious, right? It could be an economic situation. It could be a lot of things in life that might hit us. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So we all experience all these moods, but the strategy is about what to do so we don't stay in that. Because think about it this way. If I feel powerless or conditionally powerful, but if I'm in that spectrum, in that area, I'm not likely to take action. But if I feel unconditionally powerful, I'm going to take charge of my life, and I'm going to move forward out of these difficult circumstances. So there's many strategies. So let me give you an example. We talked about reframing, but here's a very easy one, is awareness and then use intentional disruption. So intentional disruption is when you feel yourself feeling down or that, and instead of wallowing in it, intentionally disrupt yourself so you don't stay in that mood and you redirect it. So an example would be when something bad happens, instead of saying, why does this happen to me? Oh, this is awful, which is very easy to get into. say, what am I going to do about this? Got it. What am I going to do about this? Or if I make a proposal to my boss or people around me and somebody says no, I can be upset about it and feel powerless or resigned. Or I can say to the person, what would it take so that we could move forward? How do we get agreement? Or another great question, it's in the book, is can you live with it? We allow ourselves to get hung up on small issues, I feel. And we don't sometimes say, is this really a deal breaker? So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. I was doing a session for the U.S. Marines, and I do a lot of work in the military, but I do a lot of work with a lot of international organizations. In any case, so this facilitator, using my strategies, was trying to get everybody to agree to something. And there was one holdout. And so he said to the one holdout, what would you suggest? Because she said, I'm not going to go with it. And he said, what would you suggest? And she said, I don't have a suggestion. And he said, well, what would it take for you to agree to it, for us to move forward? And she goes, I don't know. And then he said, can you live with it? She paused. She looked around and she said, you know what? I don't like it and I don't agree with this, but I can live with it. So I asked her later on, I said, what was it like being asked these questions? She said, these questions are great to not only ask other people, but they're great to ask yourself, because we all get hung up on these things. When he said, what would you suggest? I didn't have an answer. What would it take for you to agree? Didn't have an answer. But when he said, can you live with it? I realized I'm hung up on my ego. I'm holding up everybody, and it's not a deal breaker. I got to move forward. And so, incidentally, letting it go and saying, can you live with it, doesn't mean we get to keep complaining about it. It means moving forward. So it's like I said, I'll give you one other example. A friend of mine was having problems in his marriage, and he kept complaining about his wife. And I said, look, your wife keeps doing the very things that you're upset about. So she's just being herself. Let her be. And it was eye-opening. He still says to this day that was some of the best piece of advice, because he's trying to change her, and yet the aspects that he was really upset with her weren't really deal breakers. It's like annoyances, but it's like her being her, and expecting her to be different. And so a lot of it is around intentional disruption. Whatever we do to read, but don't wallow in the moods that are not productive. Get yourself into being unconditionally powerful by at least using intentional disruption and through the art of questions.
Steven, you used the sentence letting go, and suddenly it came to my mind, mindfulness. So, which is basically the understanding of your emotions, acknowledging a situation or an emotion, and being capable of removing that from the emotional weight or the reaction that we can have. What is your take about the use of mindfulness, like breathing exercises and meditation, in order to help people move forward from an emotionally charged situation?
So I think it's great. And to me, that's under the umbrella of intentional disruption. We just talked about what I call, and I didn't say this until now, mental intentional disruption, the art of questions. But there's also physical intentional disruption. Physical intentional disruption might be an example where you're sitting at your desk and an email comes in and you're upset. The worst thing you can do is sit at your desk. Maybe you walk around, you go exercise, whatever. But another thing might be about breathing. It could be about, again, doing some exercise, might be doing yoga, might be doing something, but whatever you're doing is you're physically disrupting how you're acting. And people might say, well, how do I apply that at work? But I'll give you an easy example. Let's say you always have a meeting in a particular location, and you got to talk about something tense, and you've always met in this one room. Change the location. A lot of my seminars and sessions that I do privately for organizations, and I work with a lot of high achieving teams, executive teams, I encourage my client to actually choose a different location, preferably an offsite, somewhere where they've never even met before, because they don't have various associations. So whether it's breathing, yoga, whatever, change either physically disrupt, right, the physical surroundings or physically what we're doing, or mentally disrupt through the art of questions, because whatever we focus on grows. So whoever asks those questions redirects it. So you can redirect it through questions or through something physical.
So even the fact of building this mindfulness exercise, it only works if you do it consistently, even if it is, because if you wait kind of like when you have a very charged, emotionally charged situation to practice letting go of things is going to be tough. It needs to be a practice that you do consistently so the day it happens, you are able to move forward. So it's almost like creating a neural pathway or a habit or a new repetitive actions that will work when necessary. Now, in the area of creating a habit or conditioning yourself to have a positive mood, how can we do it in reality? What are the daily things that we can practice in order to have this unconditional power mood?
Well, so there are many, right? And some of them we're talking about reframing or whatever, and another is intentional disruption, but even the awareness around it. So I want to talk about awareness related to, when we use these strategies, because obviously what you were talking about just a moment ago is really critical that we prepare ourselves, right? The best athletes, whatever. The reason why they're so great on game day is because they've gone through these various scenarios. They've prepared. The reason why somebody can great speech isn't because they're winging it. It's because of all the preparation. The reason why somebody can be a great pianist is not because they suddenly sing the notes. It's because they prepared. So absolutely preparation. Now, so that's like absolute. So what else can you do? And how do you think through this? Well, let's talk about how human beings learn and how you can approach problems. When we learn something, often at first it's like after the accident. So, oh my gosh, I've been so upset and I felt powerless. And so I need to reframe intentionally disrupted, cheer myself up or to redirect, or, a lot of the other strategies you talk about are surroundings and input. That's input tries output is another strategy in the book, but there's afterwards. Then when we start to get the hang of things, we start to see when the train wreck is happening, and it's happening, and we start to redirect it. But pure mastery is when we can see the train wreck going to happen, and before it ever begins, we've already redirected it. So preparation absolutely helps, but we also need to give ourselves a break. So if you're feeling, you try a strategy and it goes great, and then you forget about it and you're feeling down, just open the book or listen to the podcast that we're talking about, and just do it better and redirect it. And with you doing it more and more, you'll start to see go from after the accident to during the accident to the pure mastery is before the accident ever happens. So just start wherever you're at and do something.
It is consistent. For the last 20 years, I have heard the same. Many leaders are continuously struggling to build a team of high achievers, so people who are performing at their best. So what actions should these leaders do consistently in order to have their team performing correctly?
So there's many things that somebody can do, but let me just talk about something. First, I want to talk about how we view teams. So most of the terminology around there is about high performing teams. And I think high performing teams is old hat and no longer accurate. What we're really after is not performance, we're after achievement. And that's an important distinction, because if you've ever said, and I've worked with a lot of leaders and executives who get frustrated and they say to somebody, well, I need you to do something. And they go, well, what do you want me to do? I'm working really hard. Like, that's not the problem. It's not that you're not working hard. It's about achievement. So I developed this terminology around consistently high achieving teams, because the other thing is you can get people to achieve things, but sometimes it's easy to burn people out. Like, they cross over the finish line and we have achieved great things, but it's about how to do this consistently. And so hence consistently high achieving teams versus the old terminology of high performing teams. So even if somebody just took that terminology, they can actually bring that to their organization and say, it's no longer about performance, it's about achievement. That's a reframe and gets people moving. So that's absolutely something to do. And that deals with three things that somebody can do that can immediately help their team and get more out of the people around them. It's also the key to retention, no matter the industry. The first is meaningful work. And so people feel like they want to be part of an organization, part of a team, if they feel like what they're doing is meaningful. In other words, it has a sense of purpose, but it's not just trying to be great. It's about purpose with impact. It's a world of difference between me saying, I want to, our company wants to do a great job because we care about customers versus our team is about taking care of the customer in such a way as they use our service and then they make more money and have more career opportunities and able to give people raises. Hence, it impacts people's families. So this may not do the best job, but what I'm trying to say is connect it to meaningful work. So impact with purpose, or what I say, purpose with impact, or even the why behind the why or whatever. Second is about great relationships. And that's about a sense of family. And it's a sense of having someone's back, that we have someone's back. So people are really drawn to organizations and work harder when they feel like they're around people who care about them and have great relationships. And it feels like a family and they're watching and they have their back, as I'm saying. Third thing is a sense of achievement, which is what I was talking about earlier. And that is people want to be part of an organization that's not only having meaningful work, not only great relationships, they feel like things are getting done. Have you ever been part of a team or part of an organization that it's like you're spinning your wheels? It's like we're not achieving anything. And we've got to move forward and have a sense that things are getting done. So it's meaningful work, great relationships, and a sense of achievement. If you focus on that, you'll have a great retention, but you also get more out of people. And that's the key to building great teams.
I love specifically this part when you're talking about great relationships. And for me, it's a little bit more than just the simple sense of we are doing something together, but we are also counting on each other. And you have mentioned it. It's a little bit like, and I read a book, I don't remember the name of the book, about certain examples in American football or even in the army, that this sense that your life depends on the life of the other, that it solidifies, it makes the team work together. And this is not, people don't talk enough about that in the corporations. That's the sad thing. We talk about collaboration, helping each other, but the essence of collaboration is this feeling that we are there for each other, right?
Right. And so people don't know how to get there. So let me kind of give them this. And out of everything we said, this is actually now, even though it's kind of towards the end of the podcast, this is the most important thing. The most important thing is the following thing. The number one thing that bogs down relationships is lack of honest communication. But what I mean by honest communication is not about the truth or lies. It's about what's not getting said. So the biggest problem in all teams, all organizations, all relationships is not what people say, it's what they don't say to each other. Just this morning, I was working with a client of mine who's frustrated about his leadership. And what he was frustrated about was we're getting these issues out on the table, but the problem is we're not getting it resolved. So we're getting the unsaid said around the issues, but what we're not getting the unsaid said is what are the ideas? How do we move it forward and getting it moving forward? So I gave him some strategies about what he could recommend to his boss, because he was doing a great job internally with his team, being a client of mine, than what he was using. So the idea is the biggest problem is never what we say, it's what we don't say. Let me give you an easy micro example, because people might challenge me and say, well, I've sometimes said things and it didn't go well. So I had this a participant in a session of mine. She said, and she pushed back. She said, I've said things and sometimes it doesn't go well. I said, give me an example. She said, all right, I told my coworker that he's dropping the ball and he didn't like that. And I said, well, why did you tell your coworker this? And she said, well, because I care about him. I want us to all work great together, and I care about helping people, and we're all in this together. And I said, did you say all of that? And she said, no. I said, I would contend that it's not that you said about dropping the ball. It's that you didn't say all the other stuff. It's like, people can hear tough stuff as long as we say good stuff. Have you ever met somebody who just says a whole bunch of negative complaining, but they never say anything positive? And after a while, we disconnect from them because they're just filled with complaints and instead of saying something nice and something good, or encouraging us or whatever the case may be. So I say this because the most important thing to remember about building all relationships is about honest communication. In other words, to get the unsaid said.
Hmm. Uh, I wanted to clarify something because I'm someone who has hated the feedback sandwich
Oh,
for
yeah.
many years. So
It's
what Steven
incredible.
just said has nothing to do with the feedback sandwich. It is making a person have the honest feedback about what happened, but saying, why do I care about this thing?
Correct.
It's not the same as the feedback sandwich. And you did that correct and this incorrect? No, come on, forget it. It's an old practice of the 80s.
The problem with the feedback sandwiches you're talking about, for those people who may not exactly know what that is you know what you want to say and you sandwich it between two compliments. It goes like, I appreciate all the work you're doing, but I wish you would have gotten this thing on time. But thank you for working with me. Right. The problem with that is it's not honest and it's not really getting the unsaid said, because what people are doing in that moment is they have what they want to say and they're trying to manipulate and say other things that are not really sincere. They're just putting that so it comes off, or they might say, well, I do care about that person. Yeah, but what you really want to say, the reason why you want to have that conversation is because that person is dropping the ball or there's a problem. So get right to it. I work with a lot of executives and a lot of what frustrates them is people who kind of beat around the bush. They don't say what the issue is and getting the unsaid said. So you can say to somebody, look, I got to tell you about a problem and I'm going to get right to it. And I have some ideas on how to fix it. So let me go right to it. So the sandwich method, the problem is it's incredibly manipulative. And in fact, it's so manipulative that we've all probably felt this, where somebody calls you and says, hey, I wanted to let you know, I really appreciate what you did last week. And you're like, uh-oh, something bad's about to happen. And it usually is. Hey, can I borrow some money? Or, hey, why did you do this? Or whatever. And you're like, oh, gosh, just tell me what you're really trying to say or what you want to ask, And so that's the whole thing of getting the unsaid said and getting to the point.
Steven, in 2023 has been a great year for trainings. In fact, I was looking at some numbers that most of the companies have increased the expenditure per employee. There has been a great shift towards more soft skills. In the past, pre-COVID, it was all about technical skills, how to do certain things. But what is funny, because some people open the book and told me this is the curricula that we have today. In terms of the meta skill or how to do things, I didn't see many trainings regarding how to deal with your mindset. I didn't see so many things that can help us deal with our mood, to have high achieving teams. There was a lot of leadership development skills and so on. But and I was thinking, why is it that this concept, we understand it when it is at an individual level that we need to work on our mindset, but when we want to invest on our employee, we believe that no, they are not really individuals, it's about the company. So my big question is, should unconditional power be taught as part of the standard curricula in corporations? Let's dream big.
Well, obviously, that's a great softball question. In other words, of course, I'm going to say yes. But let me explain why I'm saying this is because mindset, to what you're just mentioning, is critically important. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, why mindset is so important to teamwork and organizations. So we do a lot of work, as I was saying, with teams and about high achieving teams, and work a lot with executive teams. And so I was hired to work with this team, and a client of mine said, look, I really want this team to work better, and there's working in silos and whatnot. And so part of the work we do is to do interviews with the various people in the session, so we get a clear understanding of what the issues are and get the unsaid said. So we found out that what was really going on was the people in the session thought their boss should just leave them alone. In other words, we don't need to be a team. In fact, if you just leave me alone, I can do a lot better job. So I let him know that, and he got really upset. And because he's trying to improve the team, and I was saying, you got a bigger problem because the team doesn't even feel like it should be a team. In fact, they want you to leave them alone. Now, here's the good news. By finding that out, he was able to restate and create a business case why it was so important to be a team. And here's the reason why. Great teams produce great achievers. Great achievers don't always produce great teams. Great teams produce great achievers, but great achievers don't produce great teams. And what I mean by that is it's easy to see this in sports where you can assemble a lot of great talent, but it doesn't always make a great team. But here's what's fascinating. It's true in organizations, in corporations, and associations, and government agencies as well. When the culture, the mindset, the team has a great attitude and perspective, it will make C players be B players, B players be A players, because they'll get the more out of that person. So unconditional power, by having people feel more powerful, but again, not powerful over someone, they just start willing to be more assertive, they take action, they think about others, they're more compassionate. When they do all of those things, it makes the organization better. So unconditional power is all about that mood, or what mindset, or you could call it morale, that perspective. And when you instill that, it produces dramatic results. And that's one of the reasons why I've been giving so many speeches just around this subject of unconditional power. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wrote the book after teaching these principles, right? I said I was suffering from moods, right? But then I started teaching these principles. And then out of teaching it, it worked so effectively with organizations, they wanted everybody to hear it. And by everybody hearing it, it produced dramatic results.
That is impressive. But I mean, learning unconditional power is not something that you can always be successful with at 1 day or 2 days training. It needs recurrent practice, and some people needs this feedback interaction about, because they are going to be trying new things, and they need to be able to have somebody to tell them how it looks like from the outside perspective, right? It's not just a one-off initiative. It can be something that is recurrent, needs support along maybe longer period of time than just 1 or 2 days.
Well, it's true about like anything in life, right? The more we do it, the good habits we do, the better. And sustainment is critical. So it's not only about mindset and then obviously the skill sets, how to do something, but sustainment. And really that's 3 critical elements: mindset, skill set, and sustainment. So what you're talking about is sustainment. And so when we do work, we build in sustainment. And so what does that mean? If I'm just doing, or somebody on my team is doing a session, or one of our trainers or whatever, but they're doing a session, we either will have coaching and support after the session, or we teach that leader how to build that sustainment. Because you're right, we can reset it, we can teach the skills, but then how do they sustain it? And that's critical. So there's a whole bunch of tools around how to do that and sustain it. But if people might go, I what do I do? Well, the first thing is, whether they're reading the book, listening to this podcast over and over again, and using those principles, reframing and intentional disruption and awareness and all the things that we talked about, just keep doing those things. And so it's whether we support people in doing that, we build it in, or we hire an organization, whatever it is. But sustainment is really important. You know what's really interesting? It's when they say 95% of people who lose weight gain it back. And the reason why I think that's the case is there's all kinds of diets out there. There's all kinds of great stuff out there. But where it's really weak is sustainment. How do you make something stick? So I really appreciate it, because whether it's rereading the book, re-listening to this podcast, or creating, or even in a group of people, reading Unconditional Power and calling each other and holding each other accountable to these principles, build and sustain it. But the first step is being aware and using these strategies.
My last question, Steven, and I promise that this is my last, because I really enjoyed this conversation. What is the hardest part when practicing this discipline of unconditional power?
A great question too. The hardest thing is just being aware of it, and which is why it's the very first strategy in the work is it's the very first strategy in the book. Make the unaware aware. We got to bring awareness, and here's why. When we really think, and perhaps this happened right away, when we're aware of powerless, conditionally powerful, and unconditionally powerful, and we recognize, oh my gosh, I'm being powerless, I'm being conditional, we're automatically going to move to the unconditional power state. And the reason why I say automatically is no one says, I feel powerless and I'm happy about it. So why do we get there is because in some sense, we're almost numb to it, but bringing awareness. So what does this actually mean? I've had clients and I've had people, we have posters. In fact, if they send us an email, we'll send them a diagram of this whole unconditional power for free. So all they have to do is mention the podcast and we'll send it for free. And what they can do is reprint it and just be aware of it and talk about it. By bringing awareness, people will move to the unconditional power state. And so that's what's really critical. So the hardest thing is just the unawareness, but the easiest thing is making people aware. And that becomes the hardest thing, becomes the easiest thing. And ultimately, people will move to the unconditionally powerful state.
Love that. So my last recommendation for the audience today is read the book, Unconditional Power. I really recommend. There is a great deal of examples, clear examples. It's not fluffiness from a guru who lives in one of the mountains in India. No. Steven doesn't live in India. He lives in Washington, D.C. Steven, how can people reach you out if they want to ask you questions about all of the topics? I mean, you are dealing with change management, you are dealing with teamwork, you are dealing with high achievers, leadership advisory. How can they reach you out if they have a question for you?
So they can go to our website, justbehonest.com, which is the very first book I wrote many years ago, justbehonest.com. And they can go there and there's a place for them to contact us, or they can contact me directly. And one of the ways to do this is I'm going to give them my email, which is steven@stevengaffney.com. So Steven Gaffney is my name. And my email is steven@stevengaffney.com. So it's STEVEN, so Steven with a V, and then Gaffney is G as in George, A as in Apple, F as in Frank, F as in Frank, N as in Nancy, E as in Edward, Y as in Yellow. So Steven@stevengaffney.com. That's one thing. And here's the other thing I want to mention is if they also mention the podcast, not only will we send them the poster, but another book I wrote is called The Fishes and Sick the Waters Dirty. What I'm trying to say is it's a 9-step methodology on how to have an honest conversation and get the unsaid said and get the issue resolved. We will send them that book, the electronic version, for free, but they have to mention the show. So if they mention the show, we'll either send them the poster or the book or whatever. We'll send them either one. And all they have to do is go to our website, justbehonest.com. That's the easiest way, justbehonest.com. And then just go to the contact us, reference this podcast and say they want that, and we'll send it to them for free.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That I think is going to be an awesome gifting to start a life of change. Steven, thank you very much for your time. It was really lovely and insightful session today. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.